Now that we've drafted our pant sloper, we will make a muslin test garment. The first step is to make a copy of your sloper pattern and add inch seam allowances everywhere, all the way around. Inch seam allowances are customary for a test garment. The next step is to cut 2 backs and 2 fronts on unpre-shrunk muslin. Be sure your muslin has not yet been washed and dried because that builds in stretch, which takes away accuracy. Be sure that you cut the pants on straight of grain. You may use pins, I just prefer weights. You may use carbon paper and a tracing wheel to mark your test garment. I'm going to use my preferred method because carbon paper and tracing wheel, I always make a mess. So be sure to mark all of the horizontal balance lines, very important for the fitting, and mark the lengthwise grain as well as the dart. It's extremely important to mark everything before you move your fabric or your pattern off the table. My back is marked. Now I will flip this over and mark the other side. Both sides of our sloper back are cut and marked. Now I will do the front. The sloper front and back are both cut out and marked on both sides. Now what I'm going to do is go over the grain line and the horizontal balance lines with a Sharpie because we will be fitting these pants virtually and it's just a lot easier to see the lines. I'm protecting my table with some cardboard. Now I will just mark with the Sharpie. Our pant front, pant back have all been marked. The balance lines have been gone over with a Sharpie, as well as the grain lines. We use these for fitting. These lines need to be parallel to or perpendicular to the floor when they're on the figure. The next step is to stay stitch the waist lines of the back and the front. And also on the front, we're going to have a front opening for the fitting garment. So go ahead and stay stitch right on the seam line where you would normally install a zipper. We don't need a zipper at this point, but we do need to know where to pin the garment closed, exactly where to pin it closed, so the fitting will be accurate. Our pant fronts have been stay stitched right on the stitching line, exactly on the stitching line. No need to back stitch. Use a regular stitch length, a 2.5. This is meant to keep the waistline from stretching. It has a dual purpose, to keep the curves from stretching during fitting and construction, as well as to mark the waistline so we know right where it is for the fitting process. So the center front, of course, of the pant down to the low hip, and then the waistline of the front and the waistline of the back. We'll now sew the darts. Our darts are all sewn. These should be sewn with a 3.5 or a 4, a machine based, but not the largest machine based, not the longest one. These are vertical darts, so they're pressed toward the center, center front, and center back. Now we will sew the legs. With right sides together, I've pinned both the right and the left leg at the side seam. I like to do the side seam first because it's longer, and these seams will be pressed open for the fitting, so it's easier to press the longer seam open while the garment is still flat. Use a machine base for this, a 4.5. Our side seams have been sewn and pressed open, and there's one thing I want to mention. Sometimes these lines don't meet exactly, and students get real upset about that. Please don't worry about that. What matters the most is that the line is perpendicular to grain on its respective pattern piece, pant section. Also up here, remember that the crotch level of the back is a ½ inch lower than the crotch level of the front. That confuses students as well. So sew the side seams, press the seams open, then we'll do the inseams. When pinning the inseam together, remember that the back inseam is 3/8 of an inch longer. In this case, 3/8 of an inch longer than the front inseam. So the way to do this is from the hem to the knee, go ahead and pin the leg together, 1-to-1 ratio, just flat. Make sure from the knee to the hem everything is flat. Then go up to the crotch point and pin those together. Now I've gone ahead and marked the exact crotch point where the crotch seam will join the inseam. So I've done that here as well as on the pant front. So mark those 2 points. I have it pinned together. The pin is right at the crotch point on both sides. Now you can see that the back is longer than the front. So what happens when you sew this, you will stretch the back as you're sewing. So that's the way to do the inseam, and use a machine baste as well, up 4.5. Another thing, when you sew the inseam, go all the way up, all the way off the top. The seam allowance should be stitched as well. Often I have students who stop right at the crotch point, and I've never understood that because then there are a lot of just fabric flopping around in there. So go ahead and stitch completely off of the inseam. Our inseams have been stitched and pressed open. We only have one more seam now. We're going to do the crotch seam. The easiest way to do the crotch seam is to turn one leg right side out. One leg has been turned right side out. Now I will slip this leg inside of this leg so that I have right sides together. I now have the pant legs right sides together with one slipped inside of the other. We will now stitch the crotch curve from the bottom of our stay stitching at the low hip area in the front all the way up and completely through the seam allowance on the back crotch. Be sure to match the inseams. We're pinned together. We'll start here with the machine baste 4.5 and stitch the crotch curve all in one. Our crotch curve is sewn. Make sure that all of these seam allowances are flat, not wadded up, and make sure that the crotch point matches as well. This seam will not be pressed open. And please resist the urge to clip this yet until we have our first fitting. Here's our muslin sloper ready for a fitting.